A massacre was carried out 3 weeks ago on March 27th at a Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee, that resulted in the murder of 3 young school children, 2 of them 9 years old, the other 8 years old, and 3 personnel at the school, including a teacher, an administrator, and a person who worked in maintenance, a custodian. The shooter was named Audrey Hale, and this person identified as being a trans man in various social media postings, and they left clues that suggest that they believe strongly in gender ideology, and so we know for certain that they have a manifesto, because the Nashville Police Department and the FBI both have confirmed that this is so. And yet, nobody has seen this manifesto publicly. Even though, like I said, in every other cases, we don't only see the manifesto, but media outlets pay attention to it. Now, it's true, in those other cases, usually what happens is the killer will themselves post the manifesto, whereas Audrey Hale seems not to have posted their manifesto here, or their other political writings, but we know for sure the FBI has them, the police department has them. And in those other cases, the fact that the killers post the manifesto doesn't mean media outlets have to pay attention to them or talk about them or analyze them or report them or quote from them, and yet media outlets do, as I just showed you, because it's journalistically relevant for understanding that kind of an event. And yet, even though we know there's a manifesto left by the Nashville shooter, the utter lack of interest in obtaining it is deafening. It's incredibly conspicuous. There are FOIA laws that allow media outlets to sue under Freedom of Information Act to get it from the FBI. There are open records laws in Tennessee that permit residents of Tennessee to sue in order to obtain these records. And after noticing that no media outlets seemed to be interested in obtaining them, we decided we would retain counsel in Tennessee in order to first request those records, although other people have requested them. That's the first step. You have to submit a form. It's a very simple form, an open request records form. In Tennessee, you request it to the local police department, and they send you back a letter, a form letter telling you they're not going to give it to you. So that's what happened, and then the only recourse is that you sue them in court, and you argue that under the law, you have a right to obtain it as a media outlet, as a journalist. And so we, as this show, System Update, we're going to use our own resources, and still intend to use our own resources, in order to litigate and obtain these documents. Usually large media corporations do that, but in this case, very conspicuously, they have no interest in seeing it. None. That massacre has been all but erased from public discourse. The only interest anybody ever had in it on the kind of left liberal side of the political spectrum, including the White House, was to go and exploit it for gun control laws and to elevate the members of the Tennessee House who protested and disrupted proceedings, which often is called insurrection if done for other political ends. And they elevated them into national heroes, and Kamala Harris went to Nashville and she gave a rousing speech, unlike anything I've ever seen her do. She was so animated, so excited. And yet she had nothing to say at all to the victims of the people who were murdered, to the family members of the victims. She didn't meet with them. She barely talked about them. She was very eager to paper over who the killer was and what their motives were. Just like the part of the media that supports Kamala Harris and her ideology is very notably uninterested. Not just uninterested, they seem actively eager to talk about this in every way except to include what might have motivated this killer. Were they motivated by particular political activists? Were they motivated by hate speech against Christians, against people who are conservatives in Tennessee? It's very common to hear that people who are opposed to every single law that is demanded in the name of new gender ideology is someone who is guilty of genocide, of wanting to exterminate trans people. So if you really get convinced of that when you hear that kind of extremist rhetoric, and you yourself are a trans person, it is not unreasonable to carry out violence against people you think are actually committing genocide. Of course, that kind of speech could inspire someone to go and do something like this. We don't know if that happened because we haven't seen the manifesto or any other documents pertaining to the motive, but we should see it for that reason. The reason I just described. We should know whether that's what inspired this person. Or if there's somebody who has been in the middle of a transition and taking testosterone or other hormones, which are common for people who are female to male transitioners, people who are reassigning their sex through hormones, those can have side effects of increasing aggression or violence. Again, we don't know if that happened here. I'm not speculating. I want to know, though. I want to find out journalistically what happened in this case. Why would somebody go to a school and put a gun aimed at the heads of 3 young children and pull the trigger in a Christian school? Why did that happen? I'm not interested in blaming advocates of trans ideology. My view would be exactly the same, that even people who use extremist rhetoric, like saying anyone who questions the new gender ideology is guilty of genocide, I would not have an interest in trying to pin the blame on those people, even though there may be some causal relationship, because to do so is essentially to turn free speech into a crime. Every one of us may belong to political ideologies or political factions that occasionally have a psychopath who's part of it, somebody who goes out and commits violence in the name of the ideology, and none of us should be held accountable if we're not somebody who advocates violence. So we don't want to create a framework in which that's done. The problem is that is the framework that has been created by the media. Every time there's a shooting or some violent act carried out in the name of right-wing ideology, they look for every single journalist, politician, pundit, activist on the right, and they try and argue that that is the real murderer, that that is the person who has blood on their hands. But that is a framework I oppose when done in that instance and when done here. My interest is the journalistic one. I want to find out what societal influences cause this person to go and do this. I want to understand better why somebody would do this. Is this going to continue to happen? Is there a way to prevent it? The only way to know that is to see the same evidence the FBI and the Nashville Police Department have. So in order to do that, we decided that we would contact the best lawyers in Tennessee, knowing that it's a challenge. Because the reality is, under Tennessee law, and here you can see the Supreme Court case that created this precedent, law enforcement agencies have a lot of discretion when there's an open investigation. They can just say, because there's an open investigation, we're denying disclosure of these records that pertain to this investigation. They have a lot of discretion. It was a Supreme Court ruling from the Tennessee Supreme Court in March of 2016. There you see the headline from the Tennessee State Courts, quote, Supreme Court rules that Nashville police not required to release records in Vanderbilt rape case. And the article says, quote, the Tennessee Supreme Court has ruled that the Metro Nashville Police Department is not required by the Tennessee Public Records Act to release investigation records requested by a group of media organizations in a rape case involving 4 former Vanderbilt University football players. The Chancery Court, after privately inspecting the requested records, ruled that some of the records were subject to public disclosure under the Public Records Act. The Court of Appeals reversed the Chancery Court's ruling, finding that all of the sought-after records were exempt from disclosure under Rule 16A2, as they were all relevant to a pending or contemplated criminal action. The media organizations appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which agreed to hear the case. The Supreme Court ruled that, under the facts of the case, the requested records were exempt from disclosure under Rule 16. The court held that while the Public Records Act generally provides for access to public records, there are numerous statutory exceptions that protect certain records from disclosure. One of those exceptions is when state law provides for non-disclosure. The court noted that Rule 16, which is a rule of discovery between the state and defendants in criminal cases, is a state law exception to disclosure under the Public Records Act. This rule, the court held, provides for the release of the requested records only to the state and the defendants, while the criminal cases and any collateral challenges to the criminal convictions are pending. So we knew we had an uphill battle. We know we have an uphill battle in trying to get these documents. The law enforcement agencies have a lot of discretion. But it's not unlimited. It's not unlimited. And in this case, there's no valid reason to withhold these records because there can't be an open criminal investigation. We know who the shooter is. They're dead. There's no effort to try and prosecute them, obviously. There's no suggestion that they acted with any kind of an accomplice. So it's purely a pretext to conceal these documents for obvious political aims. Tennessee is a red state. Nashville is a blue city. And there seems to be a clear effort to cover up and conceal and make us forget about this manifesto. So knowing it was an uphill battle, we were nonetheless willing to pay law firms to represent us and to litigate through the Tennessee courts, even knowing that there was a good chance we would lose, because we at least wanted to generate publicity over the fact that these records are being concealed. And we think it's an important cause that we are willing to devote our resources to as a media organization and a media program, or a journalistic program, to trying to obtain. So we got on the phone with somebody who was recommended, one of the most prominent law firms in Nashville, and we spoke with the lawyer. And for now, I'm not going to use their names because I don't want to necessarily thrust them into some public controversy until I have a better understanding of why this happened. But it's nonetheless worth noting, because it's very strange to try and hire law firms in a case like this, clearly able and willing to pay, and then to hear back what we heard back, which was at first, very positive reaction. This is an important cause. We think you do good journalism. We're happy to represent you. We'll get you the retainer letter very shortly. And then at the moment of truth, when it was time to get the retainer letter, we got this email on April 2023, and it's addressed to one of my colleagues who works here on the show with me, who is the liaison between myself and the law firm. And they said, Harry, I'd give you a call, but it doesn't appear I have your number. I have been working through logistics with my new firm and won't be able to take the representation. As you could likely tell from our Zooms, I was really hoping to work with you all and to push for the disclosure of these documents that I think are very important for the public's understanding, if there can be one, of why this event occurred. I agree. It is very important. And they did communicate, I was on this call, that they were very eager to try and litigate this case and create better precedent, that while law enforcement agencies in general have discretion to withhold records, it's not unreviewable discretion. It's not unlimited discretion. When it seems, as it seems here, that they're abusing that exemption to conceal documents from the public for political or other ends that can't possibly pertain to or prejudice an ongoing investigation, the court should rule that disclosure is required, and that's the case here. So that's exactly what we were heard. But then we heard back that, oh, unfortunately, as it turns out, we're not going to be able to represent you. And there on the screen you see, while I have not reached out to him, I think that a colleague would be an excellent choice and someone who can assist you in all your efforts to acquire these public records. The contact information is here, and they suggested the person was someone who specializes in transparency and press freedom. We then contacted that person, spoke to them, originally got a reasonably positive response, but then they too said, I'd be happy to chat with you as part of our hotline, which would mean a conversation generally about the legal issues, but would not be a legal engagement or legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please let me know some good dates and times to talk and send me a good number to reach you. So from the beginning they said we can't represent you, and then when we asked for clarification by phone they said there's no way we can represent you in this matter. I think it's extremely strange. There clearly seems to be at least some political pressure in Nashville not to seek the disclosure of these records. I think everybody knows whenever it comes to anything relating to the trans debate, people are very eager to just remain far away from it. But to me, this is not about the trans debate. This is about the right of journalists to seek public records and to illuminate things we ought to know about a completely horrific killing. But instead, there seems to be an effort to just paper over it, to make us move on and forget about the fact that even though usually we hear all about manifestos, in this particular case, at least up to now, anyone who's trying to obtain it is running into serious roadblocks. And thus 3 weeks later and counting, no manifesto, no document shedding light on what the political motives were, or the influences were of this shooter. And there seems to be no short-term likelihood that we will obtain them in any way. We definitely intend to continue pursuing good law firms. We are convinced we need a prominent Tennessee firm, given that it's a Tennessee state court where this will be decided. To try and import lawyers from out of state probably would decrease the chances of prevailing. And even though we know there's a good chance we may not win and are willing to fund the lawsuit anyway, we want to maximize our chances to win. We actually want these documents. So we're definitely going to keep trying. And if there's lawyers in Tennessee who have experience with these kind of lawsuits, or if you know people in Nashville or anywhere in Tennessee who might be willing to be of assistance, by all means have them contact us. We have a couple of other lawyers with whom we intend to speak, but I suspect very strongly we're going to run into very similar impediments for the same reasons. So it's very strange, I have to say, to be a journalist, to be a media organization willing to pay a law firm to litigate just basic transparency and press freedom issues, and then to be told no 2 consecutive times after being told they'd be willing to represent you. Something or someone at the last minute intervened for whatever reasons and caused the answer to turn from yes to no. So we will definitely continue to pursue that. We will definitely continue to report on this. We have no intention of letting this be forgotten, because it is journalistically important, and exactly when people are trying to cover up information and evidence is precisely when, as a journalist, you should be even more vigilant about attempting to obtain it. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.